I appreciate being here. Like I said, I'm Jason in the house. You can find me on both Facebook and Twitter. Imagine my surprise when I went to go get Chaffetz.com, and it was available. The Chaffetz is not the most common name. You certainly have a hard time spelling it. I really appreciate being with Vivek. He is one of the superstars there, and I enjoy working with him. Like, I'm a conservative Republican from Utah. He works in the White House, but I got to tell you, we come together on a lot of these issues, and I think that's what's expected on these types of issues. We need hundreds more guys just like that who get it. They often say that it was Will Rogers who once said, which I actually think is quite funny, said the opposite of progress is Congress. And I think he's absolutely right. Some of the challenges and things that we're dealing with there in Congress are an absolute nightmare. You know, there's this whole spectrum. You know, I found myself about a month ago or so in Northern California. I was in San Jose, and I had an interview there at a local television station. I was going to be on MSNBC, and I was there, and the guy said, well, where are you from? And I said, well, I'm from Utah. Well, they're so focused on technology there. He thought, Utah, what, is that like YouTube? And then I come back to the United States Congress, and I literally have a colleague who had decided just this year to get a BlackBerry for the office. So they have one BlackBerry that somebody can check out when they decide to go somewhere. This is the spectrum that we're dealing with. And certainly when we start talking about cloud computing, I am talking to a group of people who have no idea what in the world that we are talking about when we start talking about cloud computing and some of the progress and things that we actually have to have in order to grow the transparency that I think the American public deserves. I want to step back for just one other component, because there's an important component here. I ran in 2008. I was 16 years in the local business community. I won't bore you with all my background and details. But when I came back to Congress, before I was actually sworn in, I had a chance to meet with John Boehner. And I told him my story, and he was fascinated by that. And when I got to Congress, to his credit, he had me come speak before all of the House Republicans. He said, I just want you to tell them your story. And I'm going to share that with you very briefly here and to get to the heart of what we need to talk about. But I think it's very applicable to what we're talking about here. I stood up before my colleagues and said, I am your worst nightmare. I want you to know that I ran this campaign in Congress. I spent $74,000. Most of you spent millions of dollars to get here. I spent $74,000 through the convention. I had no campaign office. I had all volunteers. I refused to buy anybody a free meal. I just did it differently. I refused to go into debt. I argued that how you run your campaign is how you're going to be in Congress. I'm running as a fiscal conservative. How can we believe somebody who goes into debt immediately to win their campaign is going to suddenly be a fiscal conservative when they get there? That was a very winning message. And what we did is we created these groups. We used a variety of online tools. I tapped into stay-at-home moms. I tapped into people who were retired, people in the National Guard, but they were just starting to access and really get in using the technology tools. Twitter was not quite the phenomenon that it is today. Facebook was still somewhat used. I was using a Yahoo News group, but kind of a closed group to communicate with people. So before I went on a radio program or before I did an event, we would send out a message to about 100 people, and then they would, however they did it, and some were just doing it with the good old-fashioned telephone, they would create this grassroots network. And we changed the equation to said, no longer is it big name ID plus big dollars, does that equal big victory? And very similarly, Senator Mike Lee, then candidate Mike Lee, took out an 18-year senator and Bob Bennett, in large part using the tools that you all find commonplace here today. That is going to change the face of politics. And those people, and my message to John Boehner, who wanted me to then convey it to the House Republicans, and in many ways, the Democrats have done very well in this as well. They have figured out how to use these tools to leverage the communication, to share information, to win elections. And that will not slow down, nor should it slow down. I think it's going to accelerate, and those that fail to understand that and fail to use these tools, I think will get caught in the dust. And I think in many ways for our country, it makes us better off. Now, there are some good tools out there. In our last election, I can tell you, statistically, if you actually look at the Republicans versus Democrats, double-digit percentage higher, you'd be surprised, in the Republican Party in the House than the Democrats. And I think the little competition is actually fairly good. We looked at the House Republicans. We used the Microsoft Town Hall. I appreciate them sponsoring this event. This was a great way for us to communicate as we launched different things, not only in the campaign side of things, but also when we did things online to help create the communities. Now, federal spending. Federal spending is really the focus. I'm on the House Oversight Committee. And one of the great frustrations that I think people have across the country, and I certainly do on the Oversight Committee, is this transformation that Vivek is trying to help lead out on, that we're trying to hold the White House accountable for, because they have a monumental task in trying to transform and move this ship forward. But I want to give you a sense of how desperate this situation is. Our federal government right now is spending about $3.6 trillion. Sometimes it fluctuates a little bit, but we're spending about $3.6 trillion. If you were to spend $1 million a day, every day, it would take you almost 3,000 years to get to 1 trillion. We're $14 trillion in debt. We're spending $3.6 trillion. The numbers are astronomical. And yet, typically when you go to an agency and you ask them, can you please provide me a spreadsheet of where your expenses are going? And I want to see some detail. They cannot provide it. And I know many of you have run into that frustration. One of my biggest frustrations right now is USAID. I look particularly at Haiti. I have been to Haiti. It's one of the greatest human disasters on the face of the planet. We went to Haiti and we sat down there with the ambassador. We sat down with the USAID people and said, please give us a list of what you're working on. Now, they gave us somewhat of a spreadsheet with some very general numbers. But here you have 700,000 people living in nothing more than a tent. We have spent over $1 billion in a country where $5 matters. I asked him what would be a good daily rate for somebody to get a job. This is a country where there's 80% unemployment. They said if you paid somebody $2 a day, that would be an unbelievable job for somebody. And yet we've spent over $1 billion and less than 5% of the rubble, less than 10% of the rubble has actually been cleaned up. So you, me, others want to know, well, where did that money go? Where is it being spent? They cannot provide you the very basic data to do that. And again, I appreciate what the White House is doing, because believe me, they didn't exactly weren't inheriting a great start here. But at the same time, we can't just continue to pour billions of dollars into these projects without the degree of accountability and oversight that everybody should be able to access. For instance, there's a website, usaspending.gov. Through our analysis, we find that only 35% of the data is actually accurate. Now, you all know better than anybody that the data that you're accessing, if it's not good, you're going to have an even worse result. So accuracy is the other part of the key. And we're working on legislation. And there's some good people in the House that I can tell you that really do care about this issue. At least on my side of the aisle, Chairman Darrell Issa has just been a great champion. He gets and understands this technology. The other one is Bob Goodlatte. Bob Goodlatte's son is actually a pretty senior person down at Facebook. And when I had a chance to go visit Facebook, I got to see Bob Goodlatte's son. He gets it. He understands it. Fortunately, he's got a very senior position there in the Judiciary Committee. We will continue to make sure that there are consistent data elements and standards so that you can access and manipulate that data to provide the information that you need. We're up against some major things. For instance, Treasury uses a 2-digit code in how it allocates data. And then on the other side, OMB uses a 3-digit code in order to access the data. They seem like such basic things, but those standards I want to support and help and work hand in glove with Vivek to make sure that we can access that data and provide it. One other aspect that I think is also, I want to just mention here in closing, and I really appreciate working with Senator Wyden. Senator Wyden, a Democrat in the Senate, working in a bipartisan, bicameral way. Next week we will be introducing a piece of legislation. And this piece of legislation is going to deal with personal privacy. Because while we were trying to open it up and make sure that we have as much information as available as possible, on the other side of the equation, there is a degree of personal privacy that we think Americans should come to know and expect. Specifically, in our first bill, which I think will actually end up being a series of bills over the course of time, we have to be very careful not to overstep. But we're going to deal with geolocation and GPS devices, making sure that somebody isn't surreptitiously tapping into somebody else's data. You can imagine a spurned lover who wants to go find and track somebody over the course of time. You should be able to control that information. And I've been pleasantly surprised in working with these high-tech companies. They too, they don't want their devices to become something you're afraid of. We don't want somebody to be afraid of their BlackBerry or their iPhone or something, or an iPad, feeling like somebody else is surreptitiously tracking them. And so we're going to be introducing a piece of legislation that will limit that. It will also limit law enforcement. Law enforcement, in my mind, has overstepped its bounds and trampled on many of our Fourth Amendment rights because they have right now the ability to take a GPS device, put it on the bottom of your car, and follow you without ever getting a search warrant. I think the American public deserves and expects a degree of personal privacy in their actions as Americans. We do not in this country work on a presumption of guilt. And so we'll be working that everywhere from the TSA to right on down the line. But this is something that I want you to watch for. And again, we've got to be very careful not to overstep. We don't want to over-regulate. But at the same time, there need to be technology tools and laws on the books so that somebody isn't using in a malicious way and doing something that they really ought not to be doing. Look, I appreciate and applaud what you're doing. I am so glad and thrilled to be here. I do want to encourage as many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. This is important. This is really important. And what you're doing, please, whatever feedback and things that you can give us along the way, we'd certainly appreciate it. But it's very nice and kind of you to invite me here. I wish you nothing but the best. And if there's anything we can do to help you, please let us know. But thanks again for having me. Thank you. Thank you.